Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Thomas Feulmer. I'm the curator of this wonderful exhibition of Francisco Moreno's called Historia Sintética. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to the Dallas Contemporary. Thank you for giving us your Saturday afternoon. The heat's really kicked in, so it's nice to be in a beautiful air-conditioned setting around this incredible work and to spend the afternoon with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. We are recording this, so just a quick reminder to turn off your phones. Make sure your phones are on silent. That'll help out in the long run. And I'll tell you just really quickly the structure of the talk, as Francisco and I discussed it, would be really focused on getting us to the mural cycle, which we're sitting amongst right now. So we'll talk about 4 works, and then we'll talk about the murals. So there's about 50, I think there's 48, technically 48 paintings in the exhibit, or 48 works on the walls in the show. But the goal was really to look at the 2 other large-scale projects, WCD with the car, the chapel, 2 paintings, and ultimately kind of bring us to the imagery, the compositions, the scale, the ideas that are present in the mural cycle that we're sitting in right now. So it's a really, it's kind of incredible and I always think a kind of wonderful experience to sit among the work that you're talking about, to have it even just in your periphery and to be able to feel the scale of this work the whole time we're here, even if we're not directly talking about the work quite yet. There's something about being surrounded by, again, the scale of this imagery and the sort of intent that's in it, and just being in this kind of proximity to something that was made by hand and has a sense of touch and has a sense of, intent and sincerity. There's something about just this experience of sitting here that is, I think, elevating, frankly. So before we jump in, do you want to talk a little bit about your kind of overall tone for how you think about the work and the talk?
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you to the Dallas Contemporary and for setting up this wonderful setup. What I think that's so cool about these paintings and creating an environment is how they're all, like Thomas was saying, they're activated by activities in here. We've had a few, and it always feels like a special event. But I want to give you guys perhaps an overarching idea that I return to throughout my work. One of my favorite writers, Cormac McCarthy, he said that the secret to books is that they're made of books. And I think very similarly when I think about painting. And this was something I came to over time when I realized that, if you look at paintings throughout history, they're not born out of nothing. Like, a lot of artists are looking at other artists and building upon the conversations they're having. And that was really humanizing, because you look at a painting and you don't know much about it, and then you realize, oh, they actually saw this work and they saw that work and they were in this circle, and then it really humanizes the work in a beautiful way. And I'm hoping that this talk can break it down for you guys in that manner. With that said, I think we can get started.
Let's go for it. So the first work we'll talk about is the earliest large-scale work in the show. We're giving you a little reminder image, just some of the work is outside the walls of the space that we're in. And I'm sure it's probably well known among this group that the earliest inspiration for this work was you learning about or coming to know the Emanuel Loitza Washington Crossing the Delaware piece, which is the kind of iconic American painting. So do you want to talk a little bit about your first experience with that painting? Actually, your first experience seeing it?
I was watching the Colbert Report, and they had just finished this frame, and they were the curator of the American wing from the Metropolitan Museum of Art was on the show, and the production of Colbert printed a life-size version of the painting, and they had it on display. And that's when I was like, oh, it was funny. It was seeing that episode that was like, oh, the life-size, the one-to-one reiteration of it seemed powerful to me. And then I found out that he's a German-American painter. I'm Mexican-American. And he actually painted the painting in Germany to inspire democracy across Europe. So it's fascinating that the painting that is now such an iconic American image has this very kind of global story. And another kind of fun fact, it's been shown in 2 places aside from the Met. That's in Delaware, and then in the 1950s at Fair Park, which is kind of cool.
So I put an image of it. If you haven't seen it at the Met, I just wanted you to get a sense of the scale of it up on the wall in the giant gold frame, and the fact that it really looms high above you. And there's other work around. I mean, if you haven't been to the American Wing at the Met since they renovated it, it is an incredible experience. And there's other work around it that also sort of, there are other paintings that define or question or symbol or create symbols of the Americas. It's sort of an interesting room, actually, like what it means about the Americas in general. It's really fascinating. So do you want to talk about, some other?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. Some of my first art experiences were actually seeing murals by Diego Rivera in Mexico. And that was kind of like the first time I was like, oh, painting goes on a wall in a building with people that tell a story. That was kind of like my first experience as kind of like, I wouldn't even say I was an artist at the time, but my parents were like, hey, this is an important moment. We're walking through the National Palace looking at the history of Mexico, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy, because you're looking at these giant paintings, they're very overwhelming, but then it's like you're very aware of the time of day, you're aware of the temperature, you're aware of the sound, you're aware of the people in the building, you're aware of the conversations they're having, and it was a multi-sensory experience that was very, very beautiful. It's not like a canvas, it's not like a painting on a wall. It's something more experiential. And I've meditated on this and have realized that over the years, this is a feeling that has continued to push me to make these larger works. This is an incredible mural cycle by Jose Clemente Orozco. It's in Dartmouth in New Hampshire. It looks like it was painted yesterday. It's in a library. When I was in graduate school, I drove up to see it. And I think, I feel like even how I was talking about artists in the past, referencing past works, I think it's seeing these works over time that plant seeds in my creative mind, and over time sprout and develop and turn into new ideas. So when I was in graduate school, I was like 23 to 25. I didn't really understand the art world. I didn't really understand how galleries or museums functioned. But I was very interested in like, what is the job of an artist? And I think the Lutza painting, and this is Dazzle camouflage developed in World War I by this guy named Norman Wilkinson, where they're like trying to disguise naval ships in the water. You can't camouflage a naval ship in the water, but what you can do is obscure the way that it is perceived. So they hired artists to come up with this like almost cubism-like pattern on these ships. So why Lutza and Dazzle? Before the 1850s, before the invention of the camera, it was a job to be an artist. You would go, you'd work at a studio, and you'd learn how to, it was a production, you'd learn how to make pictures that told stories, right? Now after the camera, things changed. And then thinking about making art in that way, but then also thinking about, artists using their creativity for like practical purposes, which would be camouflage. And there's also like a really rich history of really significant artists in art history, like Ellsworth Kelly, who were camoufleurs in the army. So artists were hired by the army to help create these optics to ultimately help, win wars and battles. Mm-hmm. So I think I was not really understanding the art world, I was trying to find a sense of purpose and looking at pragmatic applications throughout art history. Mm-hmm. And also, I guess if you want to go on to the next slide. Oh, is there one of just the Washington Crossing, of WCD? Of just the car?
At the beginning.
Yeah. And then, I was interested in then you're growing up in Arlington, Texas. It's a car culture city. We grew up watching Fast and the Furious. What are the elements of life? How do I bring in my life into all these works? So I superimposed the Dazzle camouflage on top of Washington Crossing in Delaware. Also painted a car that I built with my brothers. because the dazzle camouflage is activated by ships moving through the sea, we did a performance in which the car did donuts. And after the talk, if you want to see, there's a performance video in the theater in the back. And I think what was cool about this is I'm beginning to trying to figure out how to tell stories through processing art history, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's like you're starting to think about what it means to tell a story through an image. You're starting to think about what it means to the mechanics of making a painting, which comes up all the time, like the mechanics of making a painting. You're starting to kind of question like the images that are part of your identity, right? Like American images and what it means to be an American. And then this keeps coming up over and over again as like the experience of painting as a bodily experience of space. I mean, even just the camouflage ship, right? Like that's a pattern that moves through space. Like all of this stuff is ultimately like these things have to sort of they're like they live in a weird world between 2D and 3D, right? Like this experience of like something two-dimensional that the body has to reckon with and either surrounds the body or is going to be somehow in motion or you described all the sensory elements of like this flat image was still part of this experience of your body in space. I think is really interesting. So let's move on to Chapel.
So with Chapel, you know, it's interesting because like, to get a little nerdy, with Washington Crossing in Delaware, I was thinking about new image painting, pop art. Like I created this collage and then spent 2 years just pretty much copying this collage, right? It was a very mechanical process. So with Chapel, I fell in love with, should we show them the Byzantine Chapel? In 2016, I got to see this incredible Spanish Romanesque chapel at the Prado in Madrid, and fell in love with the space. I mean, it was kind of like the experience I felt in Mexico many years ago, but compressed. And then what was also really fascinating about this piece is that this was transferred from a Hermitage to the Prado in like the 1950s, and I was able to see the seams, and I was like, oh, this was transferred on the canvas and reassembled in the Prado, and they had like the arrow slit window, and I was like, man, I just love being in this space. And that was pretty much the impetus for making Chapel. If we want to go back to...
But do you want to talk about how you come across it in the Prado?
Yeah, I mean, I was just walking. I didn't even know what to expect. It was a very busy day. Usually I like to go to the Goyas and the Grecos. But I remember that floor was very busy, so I went down to the bottom floor and was walking, and there was just a wall, and then the portal was flush with the wall, and I walked in there, and you know, at that time I had, you know, studied art, I had bachelor's, master's, had a little backstory about Thomas and I used to work in education with him, and had been exposed to so much contemporary art, you know? And here I am in this like 900-year-old reassembled space.
That has no exterior. It's just a hole in a wall.
Yeah.
So there's no exterior to the Romanesque chapel.
Yeah, it's like you just walk, you can't see the back, but they created it as if it was almost like it was when in the Hermitage. And that was it. I mean, I took notes, like I didn't have a ruler, so I just measured the space roughly with my shoes and wrote it down on a little pamphlet and went home and started scheming, you know. And if you look at WCD on the way out, you'll see like how I built the back support for that, and building that, assembling that, gave me the confidence to manufacture the chapel piece.
So yeah, so talk about the imagery, because this is like a big leap in terms of like the way you treat surface and imagery.
So after WCD, I knew I wanted to have a more organic experience and really start listening to my subconscious. And I just started drawing and whatever came to mind. One of the first things I drew was this giant middle finger on the right. And it was a way, because it came with such a heavy history, I take what I do very seriously, but I think always having an element of play is very important for the work. Putting that middle finger almost took all this pressure off of whatever was to come next. And then from then, just build upon subconsciously, like, oh, what kind of mimics this? And like, I was looking at a lot of architecture and this really cool kind of conceptual architectural building. almost looked like a hand. And then I just began to play. I didn't really know what I was going to paint the next day. Through the process, I began looking at, I bought a very important book at Half Price Books. It was an exhibition of, it was an exhibition catalog of Rubens, Bruegel, Bosch, and Rembrandt, just drawings. And I was like, oh, I want to kind of paint in a drawing manner. Began looking at this book, really began looking at Peter Paul Rubens, got really inspired by him. And then I had a classics dealer, so a dealer who dealt in classics, come by while I was working. He was like, oh, you know what these drawings are for, right? And I was like, no. And he was like, back then, they didn't have Google or they didn't have archives. An artist had to either work in a studio, inherit drawings, or they would go to Italy with their sketchbook and spend years copying other works, take them back to their studios, and use that to build their paintings. And then I was like, oh, paintings are built. Like, I know it's funny that, I pretty much went the majority of my art career really understanding something so simple, and complex, but it's like a light went off. And then I started just kind of subconsciously building this composition, and ultimately really learning to understand the language I wanted to speak.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about these artists like collecting or even inheriting all these drawings, and then you've described the imagery in this work as a compressed archive. Do you want to talk about what that means to you, the idea of a compressed archive?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it just comes down to editing, in a way, just figuring out what is interesting and compressing it together and seeing how these relationships, how these things interact. Something that I guess I discovered is that, ultimately, I do want the works to feel like they are of today, and how, adding elements of if I'm referencing a lot of Baroque or, pre-colonial works, I think having kind of this hypothetical future, like science fiction, as well as things from the everyday, compressing them together, I feel like generated this feel that felt contemporary to me.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really easy to look back on, over a decade of an artist's work and to create a really linear path and try to make sense of it all. I mean, it's also kind of it's a huge mistake to put too much weight in that. But I do think it's interesting that, where you go from this work to the following work, which is part of the way we laid out this talk a little bit, but it's this idea that, in the chapel, the imagery is being collected, but they're not really, these images aren't necessarily part of the same universe yet. They're not really all working together to tell a story. To me, this is almost like all of those shoeboxes someone has under their bed or something, like all of the things that you're collecting that you just love and that you're curious about, and bits and pieces of things that you just start to fetishize and cherish and want to spend more time with, but there's like a gathering, collecting, almost hoarding aspect to this, where you just want to spend time with all these things that you love, and you're kind of building your universe, but you haven't spun the planets yet, so to speak. So, I mean, again, it's, I don't know. Yeah, we can put it as much or as little weight on that idea as we want, but.
So before I started working on Inside Chapel, I had these 11 by 17 inch pieces of paper, and I would just begin to explore these relationships. It's funny, I remember in my first drawing class at UT Arlington, they were like, you have to draw the spine. I was like, this is the worst exercise. It's like every bone kind of looks the same. And then and then as I'm working, I'm like, oh, that was a really painful moment. Let's revisit that. And then also, but then looking at this, I want to say it's a Sol LeWitt sculpture. I'll double check, but this more, post-war sculpture, thinking about how this kind of rectangular shape almost looks like the spine. I don't think everything has to be based on logic. I think some things are just I think this is an interesting relationship, let's explore it. I think I approach a lot of how I make my images with that mentality. I don't think there has to be a scientific or historic reasoning for things. Sometimes it's I feel like there might be magic here. Let's see what happens. And that's what this drawing was. It was a way to begin to explore those relationships.
There's the other one too.
So elements of these drawings made their way into chapel. So after that, this is around 2020, and I'm actually red-green colorblind. So for the majority of my career, I've mostly not worked with colors. Around 2020, a company named Enchroma came out with these glasses that are color corrective. I will never see as much color as people who aren't colorblind, but it allows me to see more colors by omitting the colors I see a lot of to highlight the colors I don't see. And I began to experiment with color. And also after working on chapel, I became interested in beginning to tell stories. So this is, I think I was talking to Thomas, this perhaps might be, what did you ask me? You sent me a question. Is this the first?
Is this the first history painting or the first narrative? Yeah.
Is this the first narrative painting?
Yeah, this is the first history painting or the first narrative painting that you created. Like the first moment when all the parts are telling the same story. Like all of these elements, even though they're not may not be the same scale, all of the parts are working together to tell the same story. They're in the same book, they're in the same universe, they're all moving together to tell the same story.
And the story is, I was like, well, I'm just gonna look at my life. I was born in Mexico City. I was born in Satélite. There's these really beautiful towers by Barragán called Las Torres de Satélite. So we started out there. My family and I moved to the United States. Instead of, I was interested in like a science fiction spaceship, like just making things kind of a little bit more magical.
You said you said as a kid, a spaceship is the same thing as an airplane anyway. So,
yeah, thank you. Yeah, spaceship. Yeah, like it's all very abstract. I'm 6 years old. But also there's this jaguar. One of my favorite Aztec gods is Tezcatlipoca. So I'm bringing the culture with me to the United States. You see the Statue of Liberty in the back, where eventually I become an artist. When I think about the allegory of painting, the allegory of art, two women in my life, my grandmother and my mother, are artists and have been very influential to me. So when I think about the allegory of painting, the allegory of art, I really like to think about a female figure because that was the way that I was really introduced to art. So you see this painter, you don't know if she's being blessed or cursed by the art career. And then there's a hydra in the back to represent, the struggles that you will encounter in life. But at the end of the day, you end up at your little desk and you keep going. Like one of my favorite painters, Katie James Marshall, says, always keep moving. Like always keep high or low times. You get in the studio and you keep moving forward. So there was a very simple reflection of my life trying to tell this story. And yeah, sorry.
No, and the Hokusai wave was representing the Rio Grande.
Yeah.
And then of course the monsters you can see right behind you as well.
The repetition of pattern.
On the.
So you see the hydra on the top right. If you look at, then it's the same hydra here, just inverted. Which, if you look, it's cool because if you look at painters throughout art history, you'll notice that they're reusing a lot of elements. Like they're not. It's not about doing something new. They'll turn it, they'll transform it, they'll adjust it to the new painting. But it's interesting how you can reuse things.
Mm-hmm. So we'll look at some of the source imagery for the painting, but it's also. This is an interesting moment too because this is like a real left to right storytelling, right? Like this is where even though these things are like kind of out of scale and working in a symbolic way or a metaphorical way, there is this like it is sort of tapping into the idea that we can read a painting or that we read from left to right, and that something can kind of unfold horizontally across the painting, which is what's happening all around us right now. So let's look at some of the source image. So this is kind of an earlier experiment with.
Yeah, this was made at the same time as the artist journey, and it's not finished, but I thought I'd show it to you guys because a lot of these elements are what's in the creation panel. So when I started working on this 4 years later, I referenced this drawing to figure out ideas, and you'll see the giant hands at the beginning. They're really small right here. The ziggurat, the eagle's the same. Like I'm referencing the Battle of Anghiari by Da Vinci. So a lot of things were planted like 4 years ago that were then revisited later. So yeah, this math and print. I think when I look at art history, it's funny because I remember I was reading this book by Robert Hughes on Goya. One of my favorite paintings is The 3rd of May by Goya. And I look at that painting and it blows my mind, but he had a print, the composition was different, but he was looking at something else before. And also you could go to the Kimball and see the Michelangelo, which was based on a Schongauer engraving. So I think what's so cool is like making a connection to art history, and remixing it so it makes sense today. You know, there's no reason to reinvent so much information, but be specific regarding the information that you do reference.
So moving on, yeah. So we're going to move on to the next. And this is this the first history painting that you consider the history paintings?
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of the paintings that are considered history paintings are on this back wall, kind of centered between the arches. And history painting as a kind of genre, like the term history painting comes from primarily the French Academy. And the earliest definition of the word history painting is that history didn't mean an event from the past, but more the Latin use of history, which is also in the title of the exhibition, which is more story painting. So it was more grand scale story painting that could also incorporate, you know, an event from the past. But it was just, you know, early on it could have even, like, you know, Greek and Roman mythology. But these kind of grand in the scale, physical scale, and in terms of their storytelling and their, I don't know, moral, ethical, or, you know, just kind of humanistic messaging.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny. I read the book *Sapiens*. I'm forgetting the author's name, and he was arguing like, how did we as beings, how did we get to where we are? How did we not kill each other like completely? How were we able to organize ourselves into cities? And he says, because we believe in stories, and we can tell stories to each other and connect through stories. So I know it's kind of funny that my epiphany was like, oh, you build a painting by putting pieces together, and it's important to tell a story. It's almost like a little too obvious, you know, but it goes back to, you know, that Cormac McCarthy quote, the secret to books is that they're made of books. The secret to paintings is they're made of, to me, the secret to paintings is that they're made of paintings. It's actually in the parameters that I've, over time, have found freedom, you know? And getting to attempt to make, and then like understanding the ways in which painters worked in generating and creating new paintings was exciting. And I was meditating on the artist's journey, but thinking about, I went to see this exhibition at Austin called The Artist at Work. Back then, you know, when you had an artist studio, what artists would do is they would make engravings or prints of their studio, and they would like paint themselves in their studio with their assistants. And then when they were seeking a commission or a client, they would give these to people as almost like as promotion for work. So I was like, oh, maybe it'd be interesting to create a painting that could communicate that. Again, thinking about my dad's mom is the one who painted, my mom painted. So I like that the painter could be my mom and me, or my grandmother and my father. And can you go to the next slide? Oh yeah. Again, not like really falling in love with Peter Paul Rubens after working on Chapel, thinking about that composition. This is the Adoration of the Magi. I love how the painting just kind of escalates and gets larger.
It's like a cornucopia or something, it just explodes.
Absolutely. And then thinking about like, oh, how about thinking about creation, making art, how this figure could have all these mystic figures behind it, adding, like helping describe the creative world in which she exists. So I went to San Antonio and I bought this book of Latin American portraits, and this beautiful painting by Guadalupe Carpio was in there, and it's like her with her family painting, and fell in love with it and used that to kind of generate this new composition. But it's like, it's cool because what I love about that painting is that it kind of makes it feel more accessible to us. I think the painting studios don't really exist anymore, but like we understand home life, we understand family, you know?
Yeah, it looks like the kids are bothering her. Her husband's there. I mean, yeah, like the description of the painting is just like all of the family is around her bothering her while she's, or, you know, like her present while she's working. Do you want to talk a little bit about the title of the show, how you came up with the title of the whole exhibition, Historia Sintética?
I'll let you
We've
talk
kind of
about
talked
it.
around it.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, well, so the title is in Spanish, in part because as an acknowledgement of Francisco's background, but also because of the play with like what happens when you try to translate something or bring something from one culture to another, or just the idea that, you know, even that images move around, language moves around. Like these things are fluid, and as they flow through the world, their meanings get more complicated, and you sort of gain and lose things as translations happen. So the word historia could be translated as both history and story, and, you know, of course, those two words have very different meanings for us in English. And then sintética could be synthetic or fake, but also that word has a lot of meaning for us in the art world, like with synthetic cubism, right? Like something that has been fabricated, and synthetic could also just mean man-made or, you know, constructed. So all of those possibilities just in the translation, the meanings of those two words in both languages, but then what happens when you translate, the meanings just get multiplied and divided, and, you know, the geometry of like meanings just really explodes. And so there's just something really beautiful about the idea that, you know, stories are made, but history is fake, but history is also constructed. And especially when you're kind of from two places, the awareness of what it means to be in a history that's been built or not been built, I think, you know, plays out across some of the work. Does that feel right?
Yeah, feels great. Okay. So I think I've come to realize that one of the greatest pleasures about what I do is being able to nerd out on art history, and using making art as an opportunity to learn about art. And there's this incredible piece. It's at the DMA. I don't think it's on view right now, but it's the tablet with incised symbols, the Olmec tablet, and it's the creation story. It's like the tree of life on Creation Mountain at Three Stone Place. With you want to say something?
No, go ahead. I can point if you want to.
Oh yeah.
It's easy to see. Yeah. So there's the tree of life. There's the mountain, Three Stone Place.
Yeah, and the four kernels
of corn. Yeah.
and it's like 9 sky place too. And so I became interested in the idea of trying to think about when I was thinking about what she would be painting. At first I thought I'd just leave the canvas blank and leave an opportunity for the viewer to kind of come up with something. But then I found out that this is a creation story. So what better story, what better painting for the painter to be painting than the story of creation? And ultimately, making a painting is an act of creation as well.
And you want to talk about how it also shows up near us here?
And so, so then I revisited the theme again in the mural cycle. So you see it between the sun and the pyramid.
There's a really incredible, you could piece together a whole reason to travel around Dallas and Fort Worth in this exhibition, because there's so many references to the local, to the Kimball and the DMA and the Meadows and all the, I mean, there's just like, there's like a real love of just like, a love of the art that's in the cities you live in and near throughout this whole exhibition. Some of the references a little tucked away, some of them not so much, but I just think it speaks to like what it means to just show up and be around the work that's in our community and slow down with it. It's really like that love is throughout the exhibition.
So I had this spiritual experience in like 2019 where I just felt I learned about Tezcatlipoca, and he's just a really interesting god, and we won't get into it, but he's also the god of smoke and mirrors. And sometimes I feel like the art world and making art is at times feels like smoke and mirrors, and just kind of fell in love with the idea of him. And then I bought this book to read about him, and I was talking to a friend. He's like, I was talking to Joel Murray, and he's like, I saw these coyotes throughout Dallas. And the cool thing about a lot of Mexica or Aztec gods is that they transform and change shapes. And so even though like this is Tezcatlipoca as a coyote. So I was interested in bringing him into the painting, but as something that has a connection to this place, to Dallas. And my friend seeing the coyote made me feel connected. So it's weird, like piecing together all these all these intuitive kind of thoughts that accumulate over time.
Reference points.
When I was in Spain, I visited a friend, and he gave me this chrome elephant. He was like, "Oh, we have these all over our house that they're supposed to represent prosperity and wealth." And so behind the painter, I was interested in putting like, oh, one figure could represent the internet, technology. One could represent the connoisseur. One could represent culture. One could represent formalism. One could represent prosperity. One could represent death. One could represent spirituality. And beginning to think about the power that these figures could embody. But also want to have an asterisk, like, or put a little star to it. I don't feel like these are also things that I would need you guys to understand when looking at the painting. You know, I also want the paintings to have this almost like Where's Waldo for adults, like, oh, you can get lost in just the details. But the more that you look at it, the more you could understand if you're interested.
You also said painters like to show off by painting chrome. So.
Oh yeah, when you learn about art history, like you'd be like, oh, like painters would do things. Like it's funny when what's when the angel comes and tells
The Annunciation.
Yeah, Annunciation paintings. Thank you. Painters would learn how to like it's got the landscape, it's got the figures, it's got the interior. So like painters would paint Annunciations because it was a way for them to show off all their chops. So it's when you begin to think about the production of painting from also like technical curiosity as a painter, that's also kind of a cool thing. And you realize that with armor or glass, like reflections, like these are little things that artists would be interested in exploring in their work to kind of show off their proficiency.
So before you start talking, I think, one of the things that I love and I'm still figuring out about Francisco's work and also just our relationship to images and references is that, and then the object in your studio, the chrome elephant, is a good way to think about this, is like the imagery in his paintings, the more complex compositions, one image might just be a personal reference for him, just something that's in his daily life and he loves. One image might be an art historical reference. One element might be symbolic. One might be a metaphor for something else. One might be a Mesoamerican flat image that is, even within that world, a kind of complicated thing that's constantly changing shapes and meanings. And all of those things come together, and they're not all. At first, it can be frustrating because I think a lot of our relationship to paintings with lots of stuff going on in them is to want to decode them. And I think that's you can stay in that frustrated place, or you can sort of like release yourself from that and just realize that all of us are complicated human beings that have complicated relationships with everything in our world, right? Like we might love something because it is attached to someone we know, or we might love something because it reminds us of a trip we took. And we have already have all of these relationships with the images and the objects that surround us. So to me, that's like the kind of beauty of like letting yourself just float among all of that, not wanting to decode it, not wanting everything to function the same way, and just letting it be a reflection of a person who has a deeply developed curiosity about the images and the things around them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's so beautifully said. And why is that important? For me, that's important because, I could sit down and tell you everything and every move that I made, but that's not so important. More so is that all these things are existing on one surface, and they are hopefully communicating the feel that I feel like, even though I love Rubens and I love a lot of, European painting, when I look at it, I do feel like, well, where's the Mexican part? Or where's the North Texas part? Like, where are those elements that feel so true to me that are missing when I look at images? And why is that important? I love author quotes, and I'm going to butcher this, but David Foster Wallace said something along the lines that when you as a creator are so brutally honest with yourself and you listen to that honesty, which, again, I think the most simplest things are the hardest things to listen to. When you're so brutally honest with what you want to do, when you're not thinking about what your parents are going to think, what your friends are going to think, what your curator friend's going to think, or your teacher, like when you're not thinking about that and you make the thing. Because I'm not Thomas. I'll never be able to get inside Thomas's head and make something that I feel like he would like. I am Francisco, and the best thing I can do is make the most Francisco thing possible. And when I think I make the most Francisco thing possible, I think Thomas will hopefully look at it and be like, that's really unique, and I feel that honesty. And I feel like that's kind of like at the core of what I've come to accept is what drives me moving forward.
So do you want to talk a little bit about the starting point for the mural cycle?
You know, it's interesting. My uncle, I don't know. There's a really good book called I think it might be the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, or there might be one called The Artist's Journey by Stephen Pressfield. And he says he based off a lot of his ideas on Joseph Campbell's. He's a comparative mythologist. Joseph Campbell actually was very close to George Lucas when George Lucas was developing Star Wars, and pretty much says that we as humans go through journeys in life. And we have Obi-Wan Kenobi figures. And my uncle, Jorge Moreno, he's an industrial designer. He's my dad's brother. When I was 19 and 20, he really took me under his wing, and I remember we went to Spain, and we went to go visit. I did a year of architecture when I was 19, but I didn't really feel super connected with that calling. Still love it and appreciate it, but something was missing. We go visit an artist studio, and I'm kind of leaning towards painting at the time. And this guy is an architect who worked for Calatrava in Valencia, but never really fully committed. And his studio is epic, but like the works weren't really fully developed. And my uncle said to me when we were walking out, he's like, the problem with him is that he never fully committed, And so at 19, my uncle telling me like, if you're gonna do this, go all in. That was such an important kind of snippet of wisdom that I needed to hear before embarking on my career. But over time, we've become like, he's still very dear to me, and he's writing a book right now on the stages of life. And he gave me the synopsis. He's not done yet, but when I was thinking about the mural cycle, it helped me break down the murals to 4 different stages of life: the first, second, third, and fourth quarters. So you have creation, which is 0 to 20 years old, and you can,
First quarter.
Yeah, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. So with the creation panel, what you see is pretty much a compressed history of man. Like, I think it's really fascinating that he starts out the book by saying, like, you're here somehow, like, but you're here, you don't get to pick when you're born, who you're born to, where you're born, and hopefully you make it out as a young adult. So it ends up with the female figure at the top right, who's the one figure with kind of normal clothing. But then I was interested in communicating a compression of time for somebody to get to that point in their life.
You want to talk about some of the imagery in the work?
Yeah, like using, like I was interested in like this fetus inside of the sun, where you see all these cells beginning to evolve from, but also thinking about communicating the universe. So like I would spend a lot of time on like Google, just like looking through imagery. So here's some of my source materials.
And then you can talk, even just in the ziggurat, like the passage of time across the...
Yeah, if you look at the ziggurat, toward the left of the ziggurat, you see that it's being built. At the center, it's built, and toward the right, you begin to see it fall into decay.
And plants are taking over.
Looking at visiting the Jose Clemente Orozco mural at Dartmouth, the Epic of American Civilization, kind of creating a figure based on 2 figures that he made. I like that there's this play out. You see these hands that are creating the universe, and you see the hands as man, and then toward the end you see like almost this pleading figure behind this battle. So it's interesting how hands are also kind of in movement throughout the mural. The Liberty Bell and the Mexican Liberty Bell, and then this. I just love this drawing. This is there's a mural by Da Vinci that no longer exists, but when Peter Paul Rubens was in Italy, a student was making a copy of the mural, and he bought it from the person and kind of touched it up and finished it, and it's cool. It's like a remnant of it's a Peter Paul Rubens that I like how this image came to exist. Some students there copying it, he buys it, fixes it up, makes it more powerful, and then it's a Da Vinci, I don't know. I think it's cool with the energy. It's just such a fascinating image. And if you look at Peter Paul Rubens' paintings throughout time, you'll see these horses in a lot of his paintings, which I think is so cool because it's again like this remixing and retelling of art history.
And that's the image that's used to tell the European and
Yeah, so you see the Spaniard and then the Mexica warriors fighting based on the Battle of Anghiari. So the second one is the Triumph of Becoming. So this is where my love for Peter Paul Rubens, I'll elaborate on it. After buying that book and kind of becoming really interested in him, I realized that when the Spanish came to America, they brought a lot of Peter Paul Rubens prints, and there's a lot of Peter Paul Rubens in colonial Mexican painting. And this new genre of painting that started, some of them didn't see these Rubens paintings, and they were then making their own iterations based off of black and white Rubens paintings. And there's even like Peter Paul Rubens, they would use it in engravings, and they were just really inventive with these prints that the Spanish brought. And I became interested in like taking these prints that made their way to Mexico and then bringing them back to here and recontextualizing them, you know?
So I mean, actually, before you start talking about, can you talk about how you decided on the idea of the procession? Because there's the first mural really feels like a true, like almost Mexican muralist mural in the sense that it's a very left to right kind of grand themed narrative. And then there's also an art historical precedent for processions, like groups of people moving in a line that are all kind of on the same road or the same path.
Yeah, so I will say that, funny enough, it wasn't, when I made the first plans for this, I didn't really have this idea in mind. This was kind of something that was adjusted after the fact. Like when I began to think how to make sense of the 4 murals. And at first I was just really interested in the procession, but I think your intuition works wonders sometimes. Like you might be thinking farther ahead than you are. And I was interested in like what, I made connections when I was reading the synopsis of my uncle's book. Like in your 20s to your 40s, it's a moment in life where you're going through a lot of exploration, like you start trying a lot of different things. You start hanging out with a lot of different people. It's a moment. They're formative years in your life. So then I thought this procession could be this experience where like, you see this female figure and she's almost has fire, like this crown, which is a rocket, which is fire, which might be burning her, and then like these skeletons in the back, which could be her past selves as she is reinventing herself throughout time. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. So like, during the pandemic, I played this game called Rocket League a lot. It's like soccer, but with rocket-powered cars. And this is like the soccer ball from Rocket League, and I like it as like the science fiction kind of object. In the Rubens, it was originally a globe, but the ball became more interesting in my mind. Also, there's a banana hammock on the chariot. So like these playful elements, like I think it's important for the work to have things that I feel like we can instantly connect with, like almost pressure release valves, like the pizzas and things that we know and understand, get us into the work, and then hopefully can move you throughout them. This is the Triumph of the Eucharist by Peter Paul Rubens, which I think there's a church in Puebla that has a huge painting based off of this print, which is the foundation for the core of the composition in the Triumph of Becoming.
Mm-hmm. There's the globe at the bottom. This idea of the futuristic element, we've talked about this a little bit in the past. I think is so interesting that, like in a lot of Francisco's work, there's something futuristic, and it's like it's a contemporary version of what the future might be, alongside like a way that we in contemporary times understand the past. And so I think it's so fascinating, this idea that you're reimagining or recreating both the past and the future at the same time, and not one that's dependent on itself. Like your mind is moving forwards and backwards and reimagining both of these things.
So when the Olympics were in Mexico, they hired artists. I think it's the Avenue of Independence, and they hired artists from all over the world to create sculptures on this avenue. So these huge sculptures. So in the painting, you see, in the farthest back, like what, just your typical North Texas special house, of these like development lots. You know, in front of that you see these these sculptures from the Mexican Olympics, and then in front of that you see this procession. So using these interesting cultural moments in my mind to help create depth in the composition, I felt like was a way to create the vibe of this world.
And it's kind of like they're walking down the street you grew up on, or yeah, like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
These arte popular figures were very inspirational for the horses.
It's kind of a skeleton horse.
Yeah. There's the pizza.
I love this slide. First of all, that already looks crazy.
So then this is called apparition. Apparition's 40 to 60. It's what my uncle calls the climax. It's when you've kind of, you know, I'm 39, I turned 40 this year. It's when things really begin to come together, which I think is interesting, getting to do this exhibition, getting to do this talk. I do feel like my work is coming together. Like I feel like it's having a point where like a lot of pieces are finally falling together. And the main character is Xochipilli. Xochipilli is the god of the Mexica or Aztec god of creativity, and one of the figures that he embodies or transforms into is the deer. So it's Xochipilli in the deer skin with a muse. And I was also interested in like kind of the vices in life, like this, like the things that you have to deal with in life. You know, you see it's got this chain and it still looks like it could snap at you and hurt you, but it's under control. Like things begin to kind of come together, you know, at this point in life. So here you see the Aztec drawing. There's a sash on the figure here, like skull, deer, rabbit, water, dog. Rabbit means vitality. So I was interested in. I think you'd just come back from Europe and you'd seen the Jacques-Louis David show, and I was like, oh, I'm going to look at some Jacques-Louis David, and found this Cupid and Psyche painting, which then I painted. You can't see it here on the sash, trying to translate what was on the belt, and adding these like arte popular masks on these figures.
So translating all the symbols into contemporary symbols.
5 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
And here, like I snapped this photo in Italy. I don't know where. This is like a reference I used for the Hydra's teeth. Here's the engraving. There's a little camera down here, and these are rocks from La Jolla in California. And then the last painting is, the second to last painting is called Stargazer. It's kind of like this moment where you're coming to terms with mortality, beginning to think about the crossing over to the next plane. It's based off of an engraving I bought, a German engraving about an astronomer who's meditating on eventually becoming one amongst the stars, right? And my dad was the model for this figure, and then to the right of it, the star. Oh yeah, there's stuff on the shelf. There's the A-wing, a lot of references, so we'll skip over for now. Ancillary globe and the telescope, and the dog and the boots. So you can see how I'm building paintings using things like this is our family dog. Those are my cowboy boots. And if I'm gonna reveal a little secret of how I painted the star, I created this grid of all these faces. This is like the preliminary drawing before I started working on it. I created this grid, and I would use this grid to map out all the faces as I was painting them. And then the final, this is what I feel like is the thesis of the mural cycle. I feel like we were talking about I feel like as a Mexican, you're both Western and American. You're two worlds coming together. And then I feel like it's layered extra by then coming to the United States. But I was interested in that moment where two worlds meet. So you have Quetzalcoatl, which is the god of life who embodies the feathered serpent, wrapped around this giant skeletal figure, which is very much inspired by Hernan Cortés, So it's colonialism and the Americas kind of coming together, which is, I feel like, this omnipresent energy that still continues today. And I'll show you guys some of the, so this is me working through the snake. That's the final drawing. And then I downloaded the skeleton figure on my iPad and would just move it around to figure out how to compose the skeleton. And this was the very first image, well, just the skeleton. I figured out the snake much later, but I was thinking about the skeletal figure as this kind of like very clear image that could describe and be the thesis of the whole mural cycle.
That's it.
Cool.
Do we have time for a couple questions? Or yeah.
I love the way you work with space in your images, and you talk a little bit about scale, space, and imagery, and how you approach that, and it kind of affects what you're creating as an artist for the audience.
No, I mean, that's a great question. Like thinking about even this painting right here, this giant figure, Jose Clemente Orozco. If you ever go to Guadalajara, Espacio Cabañas, there's a dome, and you look up, and there's this very significant figure called the Man on Fire. Guillermo del Toro, the very prominent Mexican director, speaks about seeing it as a young person. These giant images that just kind of stick in your mind, you know. And I feel like I was interested in creating something like so large. You can't help but think about your body when you're walking through these things, because they ask you to kind of walk from left to right to experience them. And I think,
And back and forth.
like, you know,
Closer-
and with
closer and
chapel, like looking up and down, you know. But I also love Botticelli, and I love details. So I also spend a lot of time meticulously painting everything. So it also invites
like
you.
the butterflies on this piece is a good example.
Yeah, so it also invites you to get up really close. Like I spent a month just painting the stars on Supreme Consciousness by dipping the back of a brush and applying it like point by point. So creating these moments that are very tactile, specific, detail, but also impactful from a distance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of leads to a follow-up question, if I could. I've seen how much time it's going to craft. How much time does it take you?
These murals clocked in at 4,500 hours, all 5 of them. Yeah.
With assistance.
Yeah, I had a team. Like, like I would love to do everything myself, but you know, it's so much. Like you have to break it down to systems, and I would usually get in the studio like 3 hours before they show up and figure out what we're gonna do that day, and kind of work with them to help me execute these projects. Sorry?
You have an FDA.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We have time for another question or two. Yes, in the back.
Are there any ideas or images that you wanted to convey in these, but you couldn't find directly through?
So I'll just repeat it real quick. The question was, are there any images that you wanted to include in these works, but you couldn't find the space or the logic for, I guess?
Yeah, and you know, my friend, he's an art historian. He said a lot of, and I think in the artist at work, I wrote faciabat by the signature. Faciabat in Latin, I think, I might be getting this wrong, translates to never finished or incomplete. It's very humanizing, because I think even Michelangelo wrote faciabat in one of his quotes. I might be wrong, but that idea that a work is never finished, you know? There's always something else you want to say, but you can save that for the next piece, you know? If that answers your question.
One more question? No? Okay, great. Thank you all very much for being here with
Thank
us
you so
today.
much.
Thank you for coming to the show.